Good morning. My name is Jean Ann Branch, and I am here in City Hall, St. Albans, Vermont, getting ready to open the doors for our 23rd Quilt Show. Our Quilt Guild has around between 55 and 60 members this year, and we have not held a quilt show since 2019. So we have a full house here. We have 131 items on display, plus everything here in our lobby that I'm going to talk about now. The Quilt Guild began around in 1991 here in St. Albans with 8 women who met in each other's homes and made quilts and shared their expertise with one another and decided that they had a good thing going. And so they formed a guild. They put it in the local paper, and they started out with about 20 members. And it has grown. At one point, we had more than 75 members. But time kind of changes that. So we do have an active guild. We have speakers who come in, and we do have offshoot sewing groups where women, and we do have a male member from our guild get together and make quilts, and we donate many. So I'd like to talk about some of that. If you look all around this lobby, you'll see quilts on display, and these are all donation quilts. We give to many charities in the Franklin County, Grand Isle County, Chittenden County area, and we, all of the women make charity quilts and give them to our guild. The large quilt you see hanging on the wall was made, all of our members contributed blocks for that quilt, and a couple of us got together and trimmed them and sewed them together, and we'll be donating that to the Catholic Daughters at St. Mary's Church this year in the hopes that they can sell raffle tickets and earn money for their organization.
Can you say anything about the scraps of fabric used in this?
Yes, so each member got a kit, and in the kit they got a piece of fabric that was 7 inches square and a piece of the gray, that you can see here. So here is a block right here. So they got the gray piece of fabric and the background, and they took them home in a little kit that we made for them, and they used their own scraps at home to make these kinds of quilts. And they handed them back in, at which time we assembled this quilt.
How many quilters would you say are involved in this piece?
I'd say about 35.
It's fantastic.
It is.
Now,
we like to involve as many of our members as possible when we make these big donation quilts for charities. So, having them use their own fabric or donate fabric to us, we've done it that way as well. Mm-hmm. And that makes a quilt that our guild actually puts together.
Fantastic.
If you look up here on the wall, we have many sponsors for our quilt show. We wouldn't be able to do this without some help from the community. So we have businesses, individuals, and other organizations who give us money to help pay for renting City Hall. We have to rent all the poles that we use to display our quilts. And we buy fabric to make some of these charity quilts at different times.
Are any of these sponsors what you would call long-time sponsors?
Yes, some of them are. Handy Toyota. I think actually most of them, we've only been doing sponsorship for about, this is our third quilt show where we've asked sponsors to participate. So when people arrive at our quilt show, each person will be given one of our free quilt show, by the way, there's no admission fee. They'll be given a ballot, and as they walk through the quilt show, they'll get to choose in each category: bed quilt, wall hanging, lap quilts, which are smaller quilts that you can use on the back of a sofa or for a child, and miniature quilts, and our challenges. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these categories as we walk through. But each person gets to choose their favorite in each category, and ribbons are awarded on Sunday afternoon when the quilt show ends. And so it's pretty exciting for us as quilters to have one of our quilts chosen by the viewers who walk through the door and say, "Ooh, that was my favorite." It's exciting to take a ribbon home. So on this wall, you'll notice that there's some similarities among all these quilts hanging here, and that's because we did a mystery challenge last year. And the way that worked is it was put together by two of our members, Diane Camo and Lucy Fortin, and they would choose a block each month throughout the year as we met, and members would have instructions, and they would have to make the block. And at the end of the year, they assembled their quilts, and these are the beautiful quilts that we ended up with. But you can see, if you look from quilt to quilt, you can see that there are blocks that mimic one another. So all of the quilts had, there's a difference in some of the fabrics. These were called crayon colors. So if you looked at a box of crayons, the 8 colors, these are basically what they used for their quilts. And they chose, they could buy fabric that was suggested, or they could use fabric that they had at home. So you'll see some variation in the fabric.
I noticed very basic backgrounds of black and white.
Yes.
Is that part of the challenge?
It was. They could choose a dark background or the white background. And there's some variation in the whites as well, and that was a member's choice.
Is it rare to see such, I don't want to say primary colors, but like bold, what's the word I'm looking for? True colors?
True color. Bold is a good word. I'm a quilter who likes to use bold colors. I'll point out a couple of my quilts when we walk through, but this was something different. Oftentimes our quilts of the month don't have such bold colors, but this was an experiment that turned out really well.
I like this this one piece in the middle where it almost looks like it's half done or falling apart. Yeah.
This is called a log cabin block. And so this person put the 2 log cabin blocks together so that all the light fabrics were looking at each other. They could have changed it around and put it a different way. I'm trying to see if
now that you point that out, I understand what you're saying. It's a
see,
different
this one,
pattern. Yeah.
this quilt has the log cabin block all by itself here.
Yes.
That person just happened to do it that way.
And if you were to align those all the way, it would look like, I don't want to say, like a bunch of triangles probably lined up versus
It does.
This unique shape that it has. I don't feel like I've seen it presented like that before.
It's a really versatile block that can be laid out in many different ways in quilts.
Well, just happened to catch my eye.
Yeah.
All right.
So at this table we will have, we have information about our guild, and we encourage people to join. We talk about some of the different things that we do in the community, because one of our missions is to spread good cheer throughout the community and to provide comfort to people who are going through a hard time. So we do give quilts to people who have had fires in their home. We've given quilts to Lori's House, which is a shelter for women and children. We've given quilts to Samaritan House. Home Health Agency in Franklin County distributes many of our quilts to the people with whom they work. So we just want people to know what we do in the community, and that if they wanted to make a donation to our guild, we would be more than happy to accept it, because we don't charge for this show. We just want to share what we do in the community.
Are you seeing an influx of youthful quilters, if you will?
We do have some new members who are younger. We do have a couple of members who have taught their grandchildren to sew. So we love seeing that happen. I've tried that with a couple of my grandchildren, and they have really no interest whatsoever. They accept the quilts and they're happy to have them, and they love to wrap up in them, but they're not interested in making a quilt at this stage of life. There is an increase in the number of young quilters. I think if you went to the Vermont Quilt Festival, you would see that they have a youth section where they encourage young people to make quilts, and I think they even give away sewing machines to some of the young people who win ribbons. So it's pretty exciting.
Very exciting.
So come on in, let's look at some quilts.
Is this your return to City Hall or your first year in City Hall?
No, it's our return. We haven't been here since 2019, but we have held our quilt show here every year since it began, and I'm sorry to say I don't know the first year they had the quilt show, but for a couple of years when they were renovating City Hall, we met at St. Mary's Parish Center, and that worked out really well. It was a little bit tighter, but we made it work, and they were very gracious to accept us.
And how has City Hall been since the renovations?
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful, and we love having it here because we like to show off what they've done as they renovated this whole beautiful building and restored it. So in this area, we have, every year, we do a challenge where our members are encouraged to, this year it was called the Dresden Block Challenge, and I will point out the Dresden block in each of these small quilts. We have never had as many items handed in as we do this year. So we're pretty excited about that. So the Dresden block, if you can see these points, that's a Dresden block. And they used to be, if you look at this quilt, this is more of a traditional Dresden where it looks sort of like a flower or a big plate, but you can be creative and artistic as this person did and turn into a three-dimensional flower. And it's just absolutely gorgeous and shows this beautiful metallic background. This one is called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because if you see there's one flower, there are two dragonflies, two butterflies. I think there are 3 dragonflies.
There's one on the flowers. If you look to the right of the flower on the rainbow petal, it's right there. I think.
Oh yes, here it is. Thank you. I couldn't see it. I knew there was something there. And there are ladybugs.
Yeah.
I think there are 5 ladybugs. But so she was really creative in doing something with the Dresden plate, and these are Dresden plate pieces as well. This one, I think it has the Dresden plate hidden inside here with the carrots. Here.
How intricate.
Yes. Well, this fabric is really interesting, and she has implanted the bunnies and made them three-dimensional as well by putting the batting in there and quilting around it very tightly to make them puff up. This is a very traditional Dresden plate pattern. It's called Blue Dahlia, and it's really quite lovely with 2 sizes of the Dresden overlapping. This one, oftentimes people who make quilts have noticed that when they're ready to get things set up and they're trying to lay it out, their cat or their dog will come from wherever and they just love all the fabric, and this happens. This quilt is called Y. This cat, I don't know if you can get a close-up, is what we call thread painting. So this person goes through a process of tracing this pattern of the cat. She uses paint and she transfers it to other materials, and then she uses thread to literally paint the cat. I haven't tried thread painting. It's a pretty, I think, an intricate process. She does it with ease. If you look at all the detail here, that's all done with thread. And then her background quilting is quite beautiful too, to give that effect of the Dresden going out all the way around.
Really intricate, like you said.
It is.
Is that now? Do you know? Was there an actual cat that modeled for that piece, or is that an inspired cat?
It's an inspired cat.
Okay.
She, I believe, does have a cat who helps her quite a bit with her layouts. This is a traditional Dresden, but it's done in what we call strip quilting, where you sew strips of fabric together and then you cut your shape. So you can see that all these little pieces are in here. And that's called Liberty. She used, the red, white, and blue patriotic fabrics. This one is amazing. All of these sections are Dresden plates, and she has a spider in the middle. Very creative quilter.
Oh, very nice.
This one is called Henny Penny. And look at the beautiful Dresdens and the color choices to make that hen really stand out on that background. I would be hard pressed to choose my favorite of these because we have, this is 1, 4, we have 8 here, but we have 16 in total.
Oh,
Excuse me.
No, it's what a variety of topics you got here too. Fascinating.
Let's go here to the rest of the Dresden plates. This one is absolutely gorgeous. It's called Love Explosion. This is, she took the Dresdens and turned them around so that the smaller parts of the Dresden are pointed in toward the center of the heart. And in the center of the heart, she has Love Explosion embroidered with a small heart.
Oh yeah. Really like the asymmetry that surrounds the borders of that.
Absolutely. It brings your eye right to that heart.
Completely.
This one's called Home Sweet Home. So the sun, the smoke coming out of the chimney, the tree, and the plants are Dresden plates. So she really used the challenge, and the shrubbery, to its fullest. This one is called Dresden Dancer. I actually saw a picture, I was on a greeting card, and I thought, well, I could do that. So I drew a picture and then made my my dancer's skirt, a Dresden plate, and made it three-dimensional with her, whoops, her star there. This one is called Shine on Me. Again, the sun with the Dresden plate shining down, Dresden, and small buttons to mimic the Dresden plate pattern. This one is really beautiful. It's called Rainbow Butterflies for Ingrid, and the Dresden plates are the wings of the butterflies. This one is called Not Your Mother's Dresden plate. Dresden plate is a very old quilt block. It's one of the traditional ones, and I think if you look at antique quilts or vintage quilts, you will see Dresden plates, but that one has its own style. These are called prairie points, this edging, and that's also an older quilt tradition. And she took some of the old ideas and made them very modern, very contemporary. This one is called Challenge Accepted. The Dresden plate flowers with a beautiful vase.
Oh, look at the colors on this.
Isn't that gorgeous? Circle of blues, and it's bedazzled. And if you look at this border print, all those gorgeous shapes and colors are here, and she mimicked them in these beautiful Dresdens. And this one is called Tribute to Myrna. I'm sorry, I just can't read that, but you can see the Dresden plates are imposed over this fabric that looks like newsprint. It's a beautiful, beautiful Dresden. So hopefully when people come in to look at the challenge quilts, they find one that they really like, but like I said, I would be hard pressed to find one that I could say, oh, that's my favorite. So this section is what we call the miniature quilts. Some of our quilters like to try a different technique, but they don't want to make a full quilt, or they just want a small wall hanging to hang in a room or to give to someone. So these are our miniatures. This one is called Last of the Harvest, and you can see that there's a lot of quilting in here. And the crow is put in there. Those are, I mean, that is just an amazing piece with these. This is all thread painting on the leaves. This is the same person who did the thread painting over there. The crow is all thread painted on this beautiful background. So it is just a stunning piece. This one is called A Bit of Fun. I do some quilting, but this doesn't look like fun to me. This is really a lot of work. If you look, all this is done on it's all done with thread, all these designs. So she does fabric painting, so she made this fabric, and then she did the quilting on it to give it that design. This is a stunning piece. This is called Storm at Sea, which was a challenge that we had a few years ago when we had to cancel our quilt show because of COVID. And there is a pattern called Storm at Sea, and a lot of people make large quilts with that pattern, but this is nothing like it. It is just stunning. And again, it's all thread painted. It even has some metallic thread in it so that you get that look of the waves and the different variations in the sea. This one is called In the Garden. So it really features very small diamonds, squares, and squares in squares. And in there you can see the small little floral prints. And this looks hand quilted in parts. Very intricate, really, to get all those points in those very small pieces.
So much attention to working with the fabric rather than against it.
Yes, absolutely. Doing different things with that fabric to make that design. Very pretty piece. This one is called Chicken Scratch. I mean, if you can get in here, you can see that there's all kinds of little tiny squares, and then this beautiful quilting on top of it. That is a really intricate piece of work with if you look at the points, they're really emphasized, which is that's very well done. This one is a workshop that this woman took, and this is called Bad Moon on the Rise. And it was learning to play with fabrics in an artistic manner and using curves. And what a beautiful piece of putting together all these fabrics. These fabrics are called batiks. They're all hand-painted fabrics, one of my favorite things to work with. And she took the lighter tones and imposed the circle on there and then did the quilting to emphasize the curves. It's just beautiful.
Are there local artists doing boutique fabrics as well?
No, most of them are imported.
Okay.
And now some people have bought fabrics that are literally hand painted. Mostly, I think, in the Middle East and in the Asian continent, but they're mass produced now. So this one's called Log Cabin, and you have to look really, really hard to find the pieces of the log cabin in this piece, but it's very clever. A lot of circular things going on in this piece. It's unique. And this one, these were scraps left over from another project, and when she was trimming her project, she said, I can't throw those beautiful little pieces away. So she made a tiny pinwheel wall hanging and used some buttons in between in the white squares to just make it look fun and spring-like.
Now, I would think much of quilting happens that way. I have these beautiful fabrics I don't want to throw away.
It does. In fact, the quilt hanging in the lobby is, that's a scrap. We call them scrap quilts, and scrap quilting is big right now because we don't like to throw anything away, so people use their pieces that are left over. It's great.
Love it.
So let's go look at some quilts. This is our raffle quilt for this year. Every year our guild makes a quilt and we sell raffle tickets to earn money to buy fabrics to continue to make quilts like this. This was a fun quilt to make because many of us got together over the summer and made the blocks and then trimmed them and sewed them together, and another member did the quilting. And so it's one of those collaborative efforts that came out really, really nicely. And the tickets are $2 each or 3 for $5, and we will be selling raffle ticket books here at the Quilt Show all weekend.
Now,
So people,
I would say traditionally people think of, like a sewing circle or a quilters group. Is this quilt sort of made in what you would call a traditional group style?
it really was. One of our members had all this fabric in her stash, and she did all the cutting. So when we arrived at her house with our sewing machines, she had things all ready for us to put these colors together and make blocks. And some people sewed, some people did the pressing, and then actually I was one of the people who took some of the blocks home to trim them to make them the right size. And then we got back together and assembled the quilt. Yes, it was a traditional quilting bee.
Speaking of all those parts and pieces, only because I've watched my mother go through it a few times, like there really can be like almost an assembly line to quilting, can't there?
There can be, yes. Yes, in fact, when we make quilts, sometimes we start with choosing our fabric and then we do all the cutting and get everything all lined up, and then we call it chain piecing, where if you're making a block that repeats in your quilt, you do all of one step of that block at one time, and then the next step of that block. So when you finish, maybe you have all of your blocks made, and then you can start assembling your quilt. So this is our raffle quilt for this year. So on this wall, we have all of our wall hangings. Some of us like to try, like I said, try new things, or make a wall hanging to decorate our quilting room or our living room, bedroom, whatever, or to give away as gifts. So these are all different techniques, different patterns, and I will tell you a little bit about each one. Shall we start over here? This is a unique piece made by one of our members. She actually entered this in the Vermont Quilt Festival at the Essex Fairgrounds a couple of years ago, and I believe she won a ribbon for this quilt. If you can zoom in, it is cut and appliqued. This is quilting. She has circles, she has extreme points, these small flange units. It's hard to even explain what a unique piece this is. She designed it and made it and did all the quilting, and it is just stunning.
Well, once you get by the design, then the texture just jumps out at you.
Yeah,
it's incredible
It
artistry.
is. It's called In a Whirl, and I would have been in a whirl if I thought I had to make this piece. So this is a piece made by a woman who made this for her son's new apartment. He just moved to Chicago for a new job, and so she'll be sending this to him because he likes more contemporary, modern, big block kinds of things. And I love the way the color just kind of enters into it in a star fashion. This one is called Winter Birds, and there's a lot of cutting and applique. And if you can see this fabric in here, looks like stones or seeds, and there's quilting all around each one of those to give it this raised effect so that you see the depth of those. And then each beautiful bird is appliqued on here and then embroidered. It's really a beautiful piece. I don't know if you can get close to this one. This is called Into the Woods. So this looks like moss on a tree. And this is fabric that has been thread painted and starched and applied to this piece of fabric, and then all of this thread painting done. It is really stunning. This piece is called Autumn Heart. It was done as a tribute, I believe, to his wife. And these are some Japanese symbols I'm not familiar with, but I know he does a lot of research and is a worldly kind of person, and he is our male person in our guild, and we love having him. He was president for a couple of years, and he does some unique quilting. This is beautiful applique, really nicely done.
It's interesting. I wonder if you'd said there's one quilt on this wall that was done by a male member, if I might have gravitated towards that anyway.
Really? Okay.
Well, it has
that boldness.
There's a boldness and there's
yes.
very, I don't want to say dull, but there's a real simplicity to the color scheme that
yes, absolutely.
Maybe would be a traditional male choice.
Absolutely.
Of course not.
Hi. Thanks. This is called Who Are the Last Sunflower Seeds, and this is done by the woman who does a lot of the thread painting and transferring the images through painting and different mediums, and then doing the thread painting, and then this unique quilting all around it. This is a beautiful piece. The leaves look very delicate, and the detail in the birds, in the jays. This one is called Total Chaos in the Era of COVID-19. So this is just an improv quilt where you take pieces and colors and make them speak. And it's very artistic. The quilting on it is just beautiful. It's a fun piece. And COVID made a lot of us feel this way, like things were just scattered and falling on us. There it is. This piece is called Pincushion. You can see it. It is appliqued. All of these pieces are cut out of fabric and appliqued on there, and then quilted over it. It is a beautiful piece with lots of different choices to make putting it together. Really unique piece. This one is called Swimming Through the Storm at Sea. I spoke about Storm at Sea when I showed you the thread painting. Here's the actual Storm at Sea pattern. And then she imposed some fish on there using really sharp points and quilting all around it to make things really stand out. That's a nice piece. This one is a larger wall hanging called Blustery Buddies, a fun piece with using paper piecing. I don't know if you can tell, but if you come closer, you can see all the different pieces of fabric that come together to make the center of that quilt. And then she surrounded it with borders and pinwheels to make it stand out. But that's a different technique where you do using a paper background that has your print on it, and you sew one little piece on at a time and then tear the paper off when you finish. It's a unique method. This one, I actually did this one. One of our members unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and they had an estate sale, and there you could buy all of these fabrics and kits that she had. And I saw this bag for $10, and I saw this fabric, and I thought, oh, I love that. This is a batik hand-painted fabric. So I bought it, and when I got it home, it had the pattern, and it had all the paints and all of the fabrics cut out. And this is painting on fabric, and then a flange edging, and then quilting around the flowers to make it, to mimic that sunflower pattern. So that was something I had never done. It was fun to try it, and it's beautiful, and I love it hanging in my quilt room. This is called Covered Bridges, a beautiful applique, a lot of cutting and piecing. This is a very artistic piece. Lovely quilting and nice choice of fabrics with the water type fabric around the bridges.
Or just more detail hiding in that, isn't
There's so much detail. The fences, the trees, there's so much there. It's beautiful.
And the texture of the stones and
yes.
the water.
Yes,
Yeah.
the fabric, good choices of fabric, and the quilting around all the little stones make it really beautiful.
Can I help you set up? You know, I'm just trying to figure out.
This is called French braid table runner. This is a pattern where you sew pieces together in this fashion. And so you can really see it in the middle where she used some of the lighter ones and then the red. You can see how those pieces come together. This is called Welcome Friends. And this person put their initial in the middle and just has, these are called friendship stars. So she used that pattern to make a small wall hanging near her entry into her home. This one is called Watercolor Gardens. Again, a lot of applique and these small little blocks sewn together to make the background to look like a garden. And the cardinals, the beautiful flowers. So much work in that piece. And then this beautiful piece is called a quilter's garden. Again, applique and beautiful leaves. The choice of the fabrics is really different with using the darks as opposed to the lights, but it makes a beautiful wall hanging. So those are all of our wall hangings. So this section of our quilt show is what we call the lap quilts or the crib quilts. They tend to be within a certain size range. They're smaller than a twin size quilt, but some of them can be pretty large, as you can see, whereas some of them are smaller. It just depends on your pattern and what you're going to use it for. So let's start here. This one is called I Heart Vermont, and if you can take a look, you can see that by using choices of colors, this is a scrap quilt. We talked about that. All of these beautiful scraps from the person's, you know, all their bins, and she made the state of Vermont. I don't know what to say about, I think there's a woman in Essex. I'm not going to say her name because I may have this wrong, but I think she designs these patterns, and she's doing some of the states, and I've seen pictures on Facebook of women who are doing different states. So it's kind of fun. This one is called Weave Me Alone, and it was a kit. And so you had all of the instructions and all of these strips of fabric, and they're called ombre. And if you look down through here, you can see that this is all one strip of fabric, but it shades from different, you know, it goes from darker to lighter. All of them do that. So you get that really nice effect in your finished quilt by moving your fabrics around. And I see a thread that I'm going to take off it right there. There.
And do you find quilting from a kit to be as satisfying as quilting with fabric scraps? And that's obviously a loaded question.
It's a personal choice.
Yes.
I think I have made some quilt kits. The two that I've made I found to be really beautiful when I finished them, but struggled with some of the instructions. Maybe they weren't clear enough for me in the step-by-steps. But in the end, you know, when you have really fine print and you have all this fabric and you're supposed to do something with it, it's like, I'm not sure I know what that means, but yes. It can be very satisfying, especially if you see something like this. This woman saw this pattern and said, I got to make that quilt. So you don't have to go buying different fabrics. It's all prepared for you. This one is called, this was a mystery quilt. Mystery quilts are interesting because you only get a little bit of instruction at one time, and so you don't know what your finished product is going to look like. Like this person, I haven't done this mystery, but maybe you made all these blocks. Here's a block. So maybe one of your instruction was to make all those blocks, and then another instruction was to make this block right here. But you don't know what you're going to do with them until your final instruction when you put everything together. And a lot of women love doing mystery quilts because it's just fun and challenging. And this is what we call a focus fabric. So they, you know, this person cut those as the centers of the flowers, and it really gives a nice effect for this quilt. Really nice colors. This quilt is called Tropical Hearts. And this is what we call strip quilting, where strips are sewn together in a certain manner, and then you make a block with it and trim the edges off by using more fabric. Beautiful quilting on this quilt. And if you can see what she did with her border, she took all of those pieces and made funky blocks with them and sewed them together to make this really gorgeous border. And these are also batiks, the hand-painted fabric, so you get that depth in the patterning of the fabric that you don't get with regular cotton fabrics.
So obviously there's a lot of swirling in the stitching and patterning. That there was a time, I'm sure, that was all, I mean, everything was hand-stitched. Is that still a very manual process, or are there machines that help you with these patterns?
This is what we call, this is done on a long arm, which is a different kind of machine than a sewing machine, and it's made specifically for doing these patterns. Some of them you do freehand, excuse me, but some of them, like this one, it's a subscribed pattern, so you can see it repeating. If you find the large swirl, you can find it throughout. And so the same pattern goes across. You layer the top of your quilt, the backing of your quilt, and batting in the middle, and they come together on this huge machine that goes side to side. It's called edge-to-edge quilting, and that's where you get this repeated pattern. And then you roll them up on the rollers and you do it again. Most of them you can do about 18 inches at a time, but the patterns, you can adjust the size of the pattern on some of the computerized machines. They're very expensive, and you need about 12 feet and room in front and in back of them to be able to do it. So we have people who do long arm quilting for us, and we pay them by the square inch. So it can be a quilt this size. I'm sure she paid anywhere from $120 to $150 just to have that quilting done after she finished making that quilt. This is called Quilting Mavens. This person probably started with what we call a panel, which is pre-printed, and then you can do whatever you want with the panel. And this was a really clever way to use this panel of these kind of wonky quilters. But she did different quilt patterns. Here's the spool pattern that you'll see hanging around the room decorating, that our quilt, some of our members got together and made spools. She used stacks to look like stacks of fabric tied up. She used, these are called flying geese. She used pinwheels. She made these stars. And then she, these are just different parts of the panel that she cut out and framed and did this really fun quilt with lots of quilting designs on it. You can see all of the quilting designs. And she does her own quilting. She's been quilting for a long time. She's a former president of our guild and does some great work. This one is called Wild and Free, and I think it's based on the zebra print, but everything else kind of goes with it. All the blacks and whites. Some of these animals have like a greenish background, and then she chose this one with the pandas. So it's a fun quilt that has this scalloped edge, which is it's a mathematical accomplishment as far as I'm concerned, because you have to measure it so that the top and bottom scallops end up in the right place. So you have to really do some math before you do your cutting to make your scallops. And the quilting in this one, which was done on a long arm, you can see the panda in here. It shows up here and there, but that's another edge-to-edge pattern. The woman who does this quilting is actually one of our vendors here today. This is called It's a Bluebird Day. This is also all batiks. Even the background fabric is batiks, and they have that depth that you love, that I love. Some quilters won't even work with batiks because there's so much paint in the fabric from doing the designs that it makes it a little bit stiff, especially the darker ones. I happen to like it because I like the way it holds up in a quilt. That's a beautiful pattern. And then you can see the block. You can see how she started with a big square and just put these edges on it. And it's a really nice bird block. Nicely done. This one's called Fairy Fantasy, and I'm not sure how she got that fairy. It may have been a panel. It could very well be a panel that she cut up and used in there. And this background fabric is all batik, and so it has this lovely design of the bubbles. And then the quilting, you can see, has the bubble prints in it. This one is called Kindred Spirit. It's a repeating pattern using squares, rectangles, and these small flying geese that you can see, the very sharp points. And it says to ask someone with white gloves on to show you the backing. I'm going to break the rules. We ask people not to touch the quilts, but I haven't touched anything since I washed my hands today. And if you look at the backing, you can see the quilting pattern really clearly. You can see the feathers and the flowers. It's beautiful. This quilt is called, it's a mystery quilt. So this person would get instructions to make each of these individual blocks and put them up. You can see that there are some repeating patterns, but not many. Each block looks to be a little bit different. I would call it a sampler, just because you're sampling different patterns, different designs, and putting them together in this really nice design so that you have a center to your quilt and then it's framed in a like manner around the edges. Really beautiful use of colors and fabric. This quilt is called Blowing in the Wind, and you can see this person put together all of these shapes in the background. It's called a tumbler, and she alternated them to make this beautiful background and then appliqued the leaves on it and did the quilting. Really nice way to show off some fall colors.
You must get somewhat used to what shapes tessellate well and which ones don't.
Yes, yes. This one is called Justin's in a Pickle, and I think she called it that because of the background fabric. But this is called a half square triangle, where you sew two pieces together, and it gives you these nice sharp points. So you get a triangle effect throughout the quilt. Really nice choice of colors. This quilt is called a disappearing pinwheel. I've made this quilt. So if you see the pinwheel in the middle, you start out with a large pinwheel, you cut it into pieces, turn them, and sew them back together, and it gives you an entirely different block when you finish. And this one They're all batiks, again, with all of that really the deep patterning and colors. And then the quilting is just these swirls, and she tends to do a lot of her own quilting. Pretty quilt.
Gorgeous color patterns.
Yes. Really nice color palette. I actually made this quilt. One of my grandsons asked me last fall if I would make a quilt for him for his roommate. And he said, she likes really bright colors, and oh yeah, she likes chickens. She raises chickens. So I went to my stash. All of these fabrics except the chicken wire fabric I had them on hand. And the hens, I tried to choose color. He sent me a picture of her chickens, and so I tried to choose colors that mimicked her hens. And she had quite a few white ones, and that wasn't going to work, so I chose these colors and then found these colors in my stash that just worked for the chicken crossing quilt.
So, once you get to a quilt you've done, your story has so much more detail. I'm sure everyone has details like that
Absolutely,
for their quilts, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So this quilt has a story. At one of our quilt meetings, the woman who's here from Quilts of Valor came and talked to us about the Quilt of Valor quilts, and this is going to be a donated quilt to them. But we played a game called Left, Right, Center, and instead of using nickels or whatever people use when they play that game, we used strips of fabric. You can see that there are different strips in here. And one of my friends I was at the table with her, and at the end, we all gave her all of the strips. Whoever won the games gave her the strips and said, here, go make a quilt with them. And she's like, what? Winning isn't always winning, but it came out to be a really nice quilt that's a strip quilt and made from people's stash. This is called Vermont Forest. You can see why it is. It's got those really nice colors that take you to the woods, if you will, and you see the moose and the bear, and in a lot of the different fabrics, she has a variety of fabrics using that theme, and then using the checkerboard fabric with it makes it very log cabinish, and the beautiful pine cones in the border. It's really nicely done. This is called Stained Glass Cabin. We talked about log cabin blocks, and you can see it right here. Starting with, this one has a large center, some of them have smaller centers, but you can see the log cabin block, and these beautiful fabrics that are from the same fabric line. They're all different colors, but they all have the same patterning in them, so that makes for a nice cohesive quilt. And if you look at the detail, each of these little pieces of fabric has a tiny little bit of black sewn in between to give that stained glass effect. It's a lot of work. This is a fun quilt. It's called I Spy, and here's the whole list of the I Spies. This is made by a woman who had so much fun with, she had to have fun with this quilt. So the way that you make these blocks is you do a lot of cutting. You can see that there are points all the way around. So like stars upon stars, all of them. That is a lot of work. And she had them coming together, making a secondary pattern. And it looks like she used all of her scraps to make this quilt. But there are all kinds of things in there that you can find, like here's a koala, here's some seahorses. So that would be a wonderful quilt to give to a child with a list of what could you find in the quilt? What do you spy?
I said to him, so I'll make them a quilt.
That just goes to show you can take any colors and put them together somehow, and it works. You know, it's scrappy, but it works with this kind of a quilt.
There's a wonderful chaos and both chaos and patterning.
And order. Yes, yeah. Yes, there is. So we have more lap quilts here. So this is a quilt that I made, actually. It's called a Bargello pattern, and you can see how it has waves that run through it, and it's done with strips. And you sew a lot of strips together. Mine were all the same size, believe it or not. And when you finish that, then you cut them. You make a tube and cut them again to make your design. And they can be so intricate, they can be all wrapped around one another, but I had not ever made them, so I did that myself. And I do most of my own quilting, and I'm learning as I go. This is called sand dollars, and I think because of the fabrics and the quilting, that was where the name came from. But these are all batiks, beautiful array of the sea colors, and the black in between just makes those colors shine, I think. And then she's got that beautiful swirly pattern that almost looks like a sand sea dollar. This quilt is called Ocean Blue Buzz Cut, and Buzz Cut is the name of this pattern. So it's got a lot of points, and they're sewn together in strips and then cut up. And you can see the block is right here, and it's just mimicked, and they're turned to create this pattern. And she does a lot of her own quilting, and she mimicked that point in the buzz cut in her quilting throughout. Actually, she had that machine quilted by a woman called Karen Abramovich, who's an amazing quilter in Chittenden County. This is called Strippy Stars and Cat's Cradle. That's the name of this pattern right here. And you can see that there's a star in there and then this secondary pattern. And that block repeats itself. The two blocks repeat throughout that quilt and make these lovely chains. I love quilts that have chains in them. To me, that brings it together. It's just something I like a lot. Some people don't, but I do. Anything with a chain catches my eye.
That star is so subtle.
It is very subtle.
If you hadn't pointed it
Yep,
out.
it blends in the background. This is called Serengeti, and again, it came from a panel, a beautiful panel, with the tree of life and all the animals, but the colors that this person chose to do her flying geese and her checkerboard around all of her blocks, really nice choice of fabrics.
The pattern around the border I really like as well.
It is, it's really
That
different.
little, like hatch marker.
Uh-huh. Yeah, really different. This is called Christmas poinsettias. Just using the black in between these big pieces of fabric, as you can see. And she made it in columns, and then sew the black in between each column. It's a beautiful Christmas quilt, and the quilting has a poinsettia pattern that you can see that repeats.
We're all set, thanks.
This quilt is called Scrappy Christmas, and it has a 4-point star in it. It's a friendship star kind of pattern. You can see it really well right there. And it looks like she used bits and pieces of her Christmas fabric, or just cut small pieces of her Christmas fabric and made this really fun quilt. This is a really good example of the Storm at Sea pattern. You can see how it almost looks like it has curves, but it doesn't. It's all just straight, squares and diamonds, rectangles, but it gives the illusion of curves. And then the quilting even, really makes that stand out. All this quilting is done by a woman here in St. Albans called Bev Cook, and she's one of our vendors. I think I pointed that out, and she does really nice work. She has one of the long arm machines. This is a unique pattern. It is called, she created this. It's called Salem Witches, but she uses crayons to do coloring on fabric. Now these may be from a coloring book that she found these images, I'm not sure, but she colors with crayon and then heat sets it with her iron. And then she's got all kinds of things going on, with extra quilting. It's just beautiful. Up here, pieces of gauze to look like ribbon. It's just beautiful. And then the sampler quilt blocks all the way around the edge, using some of those same colors to look like Halloween. And I'm going to see what the back looks like. Excuse me. You can see her quilting. She has pumpkins in the border. And you can see how she quilted each one of those sections. I actually made this quilt, I called it Geometric Maze. It's actually, here's the block. It's a carpenter square block. And I made this, we talked about chain piecing. When I got finished with sewing, I had all the blocks done because I would do step 1 for all the blocks, then step 2 for all the blocks, and then press as I went along. So this quilt was a gift to one of my other daughters. I have 5 children. One of my best friends who died quite a few years ago, but her children and my children, we raised them together, and so they call me their other mother. So this was a 40th birthday gift for one of my other daughters. And it's just 2 fabrics. This fabric is throughout the quilt, but it's a batik that has these variations of the indigo blue and the mauve and the gold.
And the chain really does bring it together.
It does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is a beautiful quilt called Springbrook. This woman, and she has a beautiful scallop border. She has a business where she makes quilts, teaches quilting, and does quilting for people. And this is an example of her wonderful work. She does really nice work. And you can see the chains running through it, and she emphasized them with her quilting. It's a beautiful piece. I would never put that on my bed. It's too pretty. This is called circa 1889 patch. So if you look, these little tiny blocks are 9 pieces of fabric, and they're called 9 patches, obviously. I don't know how she makes these, but these are made probably from scraps. And it's a replica of a vintage quilt. And she laid them out in columns, and it gave a really nice effect. Here's another one of the buzz cut quilts done in pinks instead of blues. Really pretty with the swirls. And the batik fabrics give it nice depth also. This is called Roadblock. Just what a clever name for a quilt, just using strips sewn together, but putting these blocks in to stop that process once in a while. It really brings your eye to the quilt blocks. Very clever. And this is the same woman who's done a lot of the scallop borders. I think she's got it figured out. They're all just perfect. This is another one of the quilts that I made. One of my friends bought this panel. I talked about panels. And because she wanted me to make her something that would cover a window in her home that's really cold in the winter. And she wanted to be able to look at that window and kind of see something beautiful. So she said, and maybe something that looks like stained glass around the edge. Well, this is what I did. And when she saw it, she went, oh my gosh, I never dreamed you were going to do that much work. You keep it. So she gave me the quilt. So there it is, through my stained glass window. That was a lot of work. Like I said, you're taking strips and sewing all this black in between them, and then cutting it up and putting them back together. It was a lot of work, but nice piece.
I'm sure if you've never done it, you can't imagine how hard those little strips of black are.
It took a long time. It took a very long time. And then I did my version of some thread painting in the panel just to bring out the design. Not bad. It's not what some people do, but I was pleased with the way it came out. This is called Buzz Buzz, obviously. This woman actually is a beekeeper, and so she has all this fabric, with the honeycomb and the bees and the flowers, and really fun quilt. You can see the block here and here. It looks different when you put the darker fabrics in. It changes the look of the block, but they're all the same. They're just turned and put together. This is a quilt also made with a panel and cut up and framed. And this is called the attic window pattern. So it gave the illusion of looking through the window at the mountains and the trails. This person, I gave this quilt to, is a competitive snowboarder. So I did a search and found some snowboard fabric to put on the borders. And it came out rather nice. Has a three-dimensional effect. I like things that trick your eye. Mm-hmm. That one does, I liked. And the back of the quilt. Mimic the pattern and use the rest of the snowboard fabric. And you can see my quilting. I do swirls sometimes, and I did. I tried something different and did what I thought looked like snowflakes in the borders, and it came out pretty good. So we're still looking at lap quilts. This one is really interesting. This is made by our male member of our guild, and it's a reversible quilt, and you can see his wonderful quilting, and it's called We Are All in Peril, and it's his ode to climate change. And he has a larger polar bear on the back that we just walked around.
You see that bright sun up in the
You can
corner.
see the sun, yes you can, just melting all that glacier. This is called Winter Wonderland, using fabric that has, these animals that have their Christmas gear on, and snowmen. And she did a nice job of framing out those pieces of the fabric by using some of the plaids. All kinds of, the Christmas touches are in there and the winter touches. Nice quilt, nice soft colors except for splashes of red here and there. It's very nice. This is called the basket pattern, using the triangles, the half square triangles, and putting them in this basket shape. That's something we haven't seen yet today. That's an old traditional block. This is called Autumn Bliss. I don't think I need to say much about that. It's really nicely done, just using this hourglass pattern and 4 patches and then half square triangles. And she did a nice job of arranging them to make a nice secondary pattern of the center of the quilt. This is called Fancy Forest. This quilt pattern has been around for a few years, and people do it with all different color combinations and arranging them differently, but it's a really fun pattern, fun to do for a child or just to have a wall hanging in your house somewhere, but it's fun. I like this one with the glasses on some of the animals. I hadn't seen that done before. Very clever. This one's called Sunflower Quilt. I think you can see why, but it's really nice using this striped fabric as the sashing between the blocks. Really makes them stand out. Shows off the colors nicely. Have kind of a sawtooth edge around the whole inside of the quilt, and then mimicked again on the outside border. Fun quilt. This one, Christmas Around Europe. Some traditions, it looks like. St. Nicholas. And the candles in the windows and the stocking. Fun quilt. And then it sort of looks like the Swedish tree, with the candles. Really nice quilt. And this one's a child's Christmas. This one is really unique, using a whole pattern line from this designer that have all these colors in them, but all of the fabrics go together, all designed by one fabric designer. But the pattern itself is really beautiful. All the different shapes, the flying geese with the graduated sizes. There's so much going on in this quilt. The stars, the triangles and trees all over. Really nice quilt. Now we're getting into the larger quilts. This one's a bed-size quilt, actually, and so is that one. This one is called Prim. This is all appliqued and pieced. Look at all the beautiful applique. You can see there are layers of applique, the flowers. There are 3 layers there. Everything, there's a church. Then we have a scarecrow with a bird and a birdhouse. I mean, this quilt has a lot going on. It's got to be, you know, the flag, the sun. Up here we have an angel, you know, watching over the flowers. Nice choice of colors too. The gray background with all the pastels is a nice touch. And just little splashes of red here and there. Very nice quilt. This is called For the Boys. This is, I don't even know what to say about this quilt. It is like so different from what we're used to seeing, but she likes browns and blues, and she uses them a lot in her quilts. But she also has these other fabrics that are really unique, and she has a pattern that repeats itself throughout. Just a really nice pattern and different. This is called Rangeley Nightmare. Some of us go on quilting retreats at different times, and there was a place in Rangeley, Maine where we would go, and you're there for 7 days, and you sew and you cook meals together and have a really great time and help one another. And this woman struggled with this quilt, and she had a different name on it, but then we didn't have a quilt show that year, so she decided to enter it, and she said, I just decided that was one of my nightmare quilts. It was big and bulky and stuff, but it came out really quite nice, but she did struggle with it. This is called Flea Market Flowers. This is beautiful. These fabrics are replicas of 1930s feed sack fabrics. In the 30s, during the Depression, farmers, most goods were shipped in bulk in feed sacks, and they did put patterns on them just so people could reuse the feed sacks because it was some kind of a cotton-based material. So they could use them to make their clothing because there was a shortage of everything. And these are nice replicas of all those fabrics from the feed sack era. I'm gonna have a water.
Yeah, of course.
We thought you must be thirsty.
Oh my gosh, I can't even swallow. Thank you. Thank you. That's a really nice quilt.
Mm. Yeah, I would not have imagined that you would have had such colorful like feed sacks back then. But what a great way to encourage what we struggle to do today with recycling and reusing.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a really nice quilt. I like that. I like the idea of using the reproduction fabric. I've used them before, like in a baby quilt, but I wouldn't think to do that, but it's really nice. It came out nicely. This is called Garden Pathways, obviously. And if you look at this gorgeous border, it's just stunning. I'm not sure. I have to touch it. I guess it's just the border print itself. It's just gorgeous with those colors repeated throughout the quilt. You can see that it's here and here. So she's used that fabric line to create these beautiful. It's a beautiful quilt. Using a black background gives an entirely different effect on your quilt, and it can be stunning if you put it with pastels or bold colors like we saw in the lobby. That one's really nice.
The border really makes
the border makes it. It makes it. It's gorgeous. This is called Pinwheels in the Fall. This woman does perfect pinwheels. I mean, she doesn't lose any of her points when she sews things together. She really does a fine job with pinwheels. And she does a nice job with applique. She does a lot of hand work and hand quilting. This one is not hand quilted, but she has done some amazing hand quilting. And this one is clever. If you notice, the quilting design mimics her applique. Whoever quilted this for her, Diane Como, Katie Corners Quilting, she mimicked that pattern, which was really nice. She picked it up and mimicked the pattern all the way up through. Very nicely done.
I love this style of like a large pinwheel and then a small pinwheel with the border to break
Yes.
it up, it really is effective.
It is effective. She actually made all those pinwheels when we were in Rangeley, Maine a few years ago. This is called African Safari, starting with a panel of this beautiful elephant, and used great colors to bring out all the colors in that panel. And the border, I mean, it just all works really nicely together. You can see that she did a double border here. That's something really different. I think it's, you can see that it really gives the border some nice detail. And she used the light blue background to make it all cohesive, and that really does a nice job of showcasing her panel and all her blocks with the blues and browns. This one is called Winter Joyful, and it does kind of make you happy. I mean, she has this fabric that has a winter, it has the pine cones and the berries and this blue-green color, and she pulled out the red by doing this pattern, this block. So she has two blocks, this one and this one. And it makes her fabric really stand out. And then she used the fabric again in the border to make it all cohesive. Really nicely done. We have actually a record number of pieces hanging in our quilt show this year. 131 pieces, and it's more than we've ever had. So it's a little bit tight. If you notice on the stage, the spool blocks that decorate, that some of our members got together and made those specifically for the quilt show. And we'll talk about what this whole area is in a little bit. Let's get through the rest of these big bed quilts. So this one is called Let It Glow, because she has some fabrics that have a little bit of a metallic shine to them. When the light hits it just right, you can see it. And some poinsettias, some Christmassy type fabrics. Nice, and you can see the quilting design here. It has like berries and swirls. Beautiful swirls come out with the berries in them. And her border is a metallic fabric as well. Very nice. And that's a scrappy pattern. It's either called well, you can see the block right here. And they're all the same. And she's just turned them, like someone else did in a previous quilt we looked at, to give it this effect. This quilt is called Come Fly Away, and I think it speaks for itself. It is gorgeous. It uses, you know, a lot of panels, and you know, these are called flying geese, and she's incorporated them into the quilt. Really pretty. I'm going to check out the back. Oh my goodness. Look at that fabric. Every kind of tropical bird you can imagine. Gorgeous. This is a fabric I made with a friend. We collaborated on it. All of the fabrics are batiks. And we created the 5 big stars actually, and then just had, you know, the borders going around. We did pay to have this one quilted by a woman in Jericho. She calls her business Army Brat Quilts because she grew up as an Army brat, and she does a nice job. And she mimicked our points.
I love the patterning in your border as well of the fabric.
That is a batik, so you get that you get that depth. And we did the double border, and we framed it out and then put the border on it to make it larger because we wanted a bed-sized quilt. We'll donate that to a cause. We haven't figured that all out yet, but it's going to be donated. This is called Oh My Postage, because that's called a postage stamp quilt, and I think you can tell why. Look at the size of those blocks. That takes patience. It's beautiful. She did a nice job of pulling all her colors together. It's really nice.
Now, will each like group of 9 blocks be a larger block in this process, or?
I don't know how she did it. She does have 9 patches. I mean, I think she just randomly sewed blocks. She might have 16 patches. I think this is the block right here. So she took 16, you know, she sewed them together in some fashion. Maybe she made strips first and then sewed them together. Maybe she made patches. I'm not sure, but a postage stamp quilt takes patience. And there it is. Patience. This is called Over the Rainbow. And this is a pattern, one of those disappearing patterns where you start with an hourglass, a large hourglass block, and you cut it up into pieces and turn them, and you get this amazing finished pattern that looks intricate and difficult, which it does have some difficulty. I'm not downplaying it. It does. I've made this pattern. Here's the block right here. So it has the star in the middle. You can see all the hourglasses, but then when you put them all together, you get this secondary pattern. It's kind of magical, truthfully. This one is called Pinwheels in My Garden. And, you know, wanted to showcase the beautiful fabric, so made these pinwheels that were white. Instead of using the dark on the white, she used the white on the dark. Some pretty nice showcasing here. And the quilting was again done by Katie Corners. And you can see that she has these lovely swirls that go into a flower, I think. Trying to find it. I can see leaves or I can't pick it out, but the swirls look really nice with the garden fabric.
I can almost see it.
Yeah,
like
me
it's
too.
getting cut by the
It's like
pattern.
right here, I think.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it right there.
Yep. Quite pretty.
It is almost like a rose that's opening. It mimics the flowers. This is called Scrap Mania, using up your scraps. And it's, you know, like you said, we don't want to throw away anything. So this is a really nice pattern too, where we have the square with these surrounding it and put together into this block, and then they're framed. We call it sashing. So I'm getting pretty good about picking blocks out, but sometimes it's really hard to find the block.
Well, especially when there's this, like the one we just looked at with a second pattern.
Yes.
You would mistake the block for the second pattern.
Yes, if you haven't done it before,
Yeah.
that's true. But that is a great scrap quilt. All kinds of, using up all of your fabrics. And this is called Sister Collaboration. Her sister found the fabric, and so she put together this Storm at Sea pattern, and you can see it again, where it looks like it has curves, but it really doesn't. But you can see the sharp points. And then you have this block here. It's amazing how that gives you the illusion of all those curves. And it's just placement of your blocks.
And I really like what they've done with the letting the pattern sort of terminate by half ending, but not completely hitting a border. I think that's quite
Yes, yes. It's a beautiful quilt. This one's called Stepping Stones. And you can see the different parts of the block. They're really not the same as these triangles. They're more elongated. So that's a little bit trickier. You have to have a ruler, a different kind of ruler to make that shape. It's called a split rectangle. You can see it right here. And the quilting is done in this crosshatch fashion, which really does a nice job of highlighting that quilt. The border, really unique border, which also brings that pattern out there again so that your eye goes, oh yeah, that works nicely. This quilt is just called Merry Christmas. We have all kinds of fabrics about the Grinch, and this I'm not sure if this was a panel, it must have been, with the Grinch that large. And then really taking time to make all of the borders and all of the blocks really work for the Grinch. And the quilting with the snowflakes, using like a goldish green thread so that you bring out all of those colors in the quilt and you really see the quilting on that one. And that was quilted by Bev Cook here in St. Albans. She does a really nice job as well. This fun quilt is called On the Farm, and I think there's no mistaking it. It is appliqued. It is just stunning if you take a few minutes to look at all of the detail in this quilt. The animals, all of the blocks that she has used for borders to separate her different strips. Sometimes we call this strip quilting, or row by row, because each row does something different. And in the end, when you put all the rows together, it makes this really wonderful cohesive quilt. And she mimicked the patterns in these beautiful blocks in the corners of her border. I don't suspect she did this one in a hurry. This was a long-term project, I'm guessing. But there's even embroidery with the tail, throughout. She has done embroidery as well as the applique and the quilting. Really nice quilt. And next to it, we have a quilt called Butterfly. And again, using fabrics to speak. The same pattern repeated in different sizes. I think there are two different, well, no, there are several butterfly patterns now that I really look at it, sorry. But using strips of fabric sewn together and then cutting them to make your butterflies. I mean, it really gives a nice effect.
The accentuation of the white squares was a great choice. I don't know that I would have made it, but I love it.
Yeah. It really is nice. And the placement of them, too. Really clever. She's the one who did the crayon work on the Salem Witches quilt. She does really unique, different. She tries a lot of different things.
And that almost could be a collector's case.
Yes.
Just missing the pins.
Yeah. And in the quilting, there are butterflies, too. I don't know if you can see them.
Let's zoom in on that. Oh, yeah.
She does her own quilting as well. The next quilt is called Edeline's Animals. And she took some of those, these are different animal patterns. Well, there's the fox that we saw in another quilt, but she has some different ones. And then just mixed it up with some of these beautiful rectangles and squares and made a really fun animal quilt.
So do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, okay, you know.
Nicely done. The quilting is very nice too. You can see the big pattern here. And then she made another animal quilt. This is the same person. Same idea, but her animals are a little different, different fabrics, different color wave. Really nicely done too. You can see how she did some strip quilting here to create the effect of the animal's body. Nice. This is called Soulmates, and she did there's the friendship braid that we've talked about, and then we have two sizes of flying geese and a star. She's done quite a few different techniques in this quilt and mixed up a lot of different fabrics too. Very pretty quilt. Because some of the fabrics are so soft and the muted colors, but by using the raspberry batik, it just highlights the other fabrics that she chose to use. This quilt, I want to make this quilt. This is called Mountain Forest, and I don't know that I would have chosen some of those colors, but oh my gosh, it just works. It's a beautiful quilt. You know, these obviously she used some stripping to make the trees. And then she has this block, but she laid them all what we call on point where you instead of laying your blocks in a straight line, you lay them at an angle, corner to corner. And so she was able to make her trees like that, but it just gives a really nice effect to this quilt. And she had it quilted by Katie Corners. Nice quilt. This one's called Mom's Quilt, and it's a 9 patches, and it's using, I mean, I don't know if these are reproductions or really old fabrics from clothing maybe, I'm not sure, but really nice choice and a really nice way to showcase these older fabrics. I don't have my reading glasses on, so I can't tell you what the card says, but yes, it looks like a vintage quilt, and it may be. It may really have been her mom's. It's beautiful. This is called Stroll, Run, Roll, and it's made from shirts from the Stroll, Run, Roll fundraiser for the hospital, I think, years ago, for home health. And she's had the shirts for a long time, and she said, I just needed to get it done and make this t-shirt quilt.
Well, this is my dream, is to take all the t-shirts I've collected in my life and someday get it done. That's why I refuse to throw them out so far, but I love it.
It's great. I mean, I love that she used all these accents to really showcase that t-shirt. It makes them stand out. I've made t-shirt quilts for people, and it is fun to take something they really care about. The hardest part is making that first cut in the shirt, because you're using, you know, these were hers, but I've done it for other people, and using someone else's t-shirts is like, ooh, yeah. She did a nice job of mixing up some fabrics and bringing the colors of those shirts to life. And then using the black and white sometimes offsets colors too.
No, I especially like some of the white negative space people create is very effective.
Like here?
in things. Yeah. And I think of some of the other quilts we've seen where they really let the white, let the quilt pop.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's a nice one. This one's called Britta's Tiles. And I don't know if you can tell, but every block is the same pattern, but the way that she used either the dark on the outside or the light on the outside changes the look of that tile. So it gave a really nice effect. And again, it's a scrap quilt, using up pieces of her scraps and made this beautiful quilt out of it. I mean, who wouldn't like to have this quilt as a gift? I wouldn't mind it. I think I'll tell her that. Oh, this is the quilt we looked at on the other side that was all scrappy blocks, and this is the back side of it. She made a reversible quilt using, again, all her scraps to use a different pattern of half square triangles that are sashed. Nice.
Would you be so kind as to pull that back so we can see?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Great way to use scraps. This quilt is called Bohemian Blues. It's all applique, and it is beautiful. The quilting as well is just stunning. And it looks like embroidery here. It was quilted by someone I'm not familiar with, but it was long arm quilted to create these beautiful designs around those applique blocks. That is beautiful. That also wasn't made in a weekend. And here's a memory quilt, another t-shirt or shirt quilt. Lots of detail just to make it come alive. You can see the friendship braid pattern up here. Wow. This is beautiful. Using making the star blocks with batiks to just, kind of separate things and give your eye a chance to rest on something. The way that she framed this quilt with the wonky pieces of fabric, the way that she framed that t-shirt piece is really different.
Like quilts within quilts.
Yes. It's fun to do them because you can be as artistic as you want to be, or you can just do blocks and put them together. This one's called Nancy's Flower Baskets. This is a beautiful example of using neutral fabrics as your background and then doing something that just makes you feel like you've just seen the most stunning thing. And if you didn't have the applique, that would be very boring. But using those beautiful neutrals to create a background for those appliques was very clever. Such detail in the applique. You know, this is all, it looks like it's all done by hand. It's a technique where you turn the edges under and do the sewing around each little piece of fabric. Beautiful quilt. This quilt is called Night Stars. Using the bold, the nice, deep, rich tones of the browns and mixing them up to create this beautiful quilt. And each block is a little bit different. And the border also just gives that quilt such character. This quilt is called Falling Stars. And again, it's an example of those split rectangles that you have a special ruler to create that effect. But you end up with little small pieces that have to be sewn together. That is a beautiful quilt, and it's all straight sewing, but it looks like curves. Beautiful. She is a great mentor for many of us who want to try something new because she's probably done it. She's clever. And this is a wonderful example of a log cabin, but using fabrics in a different way and using really unique fabrics. And this is the woman who likes blues and browns, and you can see it in her quilt. It is gorgeous. It's a really nice log cabin, and it creates a secondary pattern because of the way that she turned the lights and darks in her log cabin blocks. Can you see it? The dark and the frames. Really nicely done. This quilt is called Lupin on a Cloudy Day. And you can see the lupin blocks here. And she used a fabric line so that all of her colors would work together on that beautiful gray background. And then she had it quilted using that floral design. A lot of fussy work in that quilt. This is called Starry Fields. The use of greens and browns and this beautiful border print that probably was the inspiration for her color choices, making nice stars. As you can see, stars within stars, done by using these flying geese blocks and putting them together, and then the half square triangles around them. Nicely done. This is called Fire and Ice. And I think you can see why. Her choice of colors, she used the fire colors mixed in with the ice colors, and it created a really nice effect just by using squares and rectangles, but the effect and then the quilting on top of it, beautiful. The quilting was done by one of our former members who has a long arm now, and so she does quilting for her friends sometimes. It's a pretty quilt. And then sparkle, using the bold colors on the black, just gives you, and then using these like gemstone sashing, chaining, it makes a beautiful quilt. It does look like you have all kinds of stones surrounding the stars. Beautiful. The black really makes those fabrics speak.
Well, and I love what it does to the star pattern, and it makes like a punch out of it.
It really does. Yes, it's beautiful. It really is beautiful. This is called Nancy's quilt. And if you can see, I mean, using fabrics creatively to make borders, and then the corner blocks in the borders that mimic what's going on in the quilt, really nicely done. And I'm going to show you the back of this quilt so that you can see the beautiful quilting. Overall design using feathers and swirls. And that was quilted by Bev Cook as well, and her booth is down here. And this one, Are You Still Mine? Using applique, using standard blocks. You know, the 9 patches are in there. And this block, I can't remember the name of it, but it has the flying geese and the half square triangles. This block is really unique. More applique, and then the quilting to accentuate all of it. Nicely done. So we are trying something very different this year. We're calling it the Members Boutique. Sometimes, you know, you make a quilt and you have it around for a little while. You don't really use it. You're like, maybe somebody would like to buy this quilt. Or you make table runners or bags, you know, or shopping bags, whatever it is. But so we gave our members an opportunity to showcase things they'd like to sell. So everything on the stage is for sale. And if people who come to the quilt show want to buy anything, the person who made it, most of the items are donated, so any proceeds will go to the Quilt Guild, and we'll use it to buy fabrics to make charity quilts. Thank you for coming with us today to walk through City Hall in St. Albans to see all these beautiful quilts that our Quilt Guild members have made and put on display. Thank you so much for joining us.